Mark Rogers, TV talking some Ohio State football each and every Wednesday night. We call it the Buckeyes Breakdown, and we're happy to be joined this week by Tony Gerdeman from the ozone.net. Tony, how you doing this week?
Doing pretty good. How are you doing, Mark?
Doing just fine. So first time on Mark Rogers TV, definitely a welcome to you. You come highly, highly recommended. And so as a big Buckeyes, so I may need to, hold judgment. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, exactly. Make your own judgments.
Very good. I'm guessing that things are going to work out just fine. We'll have a pretty good discussion here. So being a big Buckeyes fan for a long time, covering the team up close and personal, just two things I would love to hear. Number one, favorite Ohio State football player of all time.
I was at Ohio State the same time as Orlando Pace. So he's the most dominating college football player I've ever seen. And, he's the best I've ever seen. So I think he's probably my favorite guy that, you get to watch up close. You get to see what he can do. You watch him run 40 yards down the field, leading a path for a running back. And, interesting story. We had classes together. And when his junior year, he didn't show up for finals, I knew he was going pro.
Yeah, that's pretty much the giveaway. And we know what the deal is nowadays, and even to a certain extent back then, but without the social media and so forth. That was usually the first tip-off right there. And all college football fans, all football fans know who the quarterback is. You usually know even the third or fourth best wide receiver. But to know an offensive lineman 20 or 25 years later, let's see, his last year at Ohio State, 1996. So 21 years later, that's a testament to him. The voting for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, not always what I would consider to be fair or accurate toward that position, seeing that there are 5 offensive linemen always on the field versus 1 quarterback. So it would seem to me to be fair to have 5 times as many offensive linemen in the Hall of Fame, since that's the ratio on the field. So the level of greatness would indicate that would be the case, but we know that's not the case. But for him to be a first ballot as an offensive lineman, that doesn't happen very often, and he was certainly deserving of it. So favorite player, the pancake guy, Orlando Pace. Favorite game, I know, again, I'm probably asking the impossible when it comes to all the great plays and games in the history of Ohio State football, or at least since you've been watching, but I'm going to try to nail you down on that one.
I think the one that stands out most for me is the Wisconsin Big Ten Championship game in 2014, because it was so out of the blue. It was, you weren't expecting it. And then, while you're sitting there watching it, this is different, this is special. And then seeing everybody on the field after the game, where, everybody's got their emotions going. Coaches are hugging players. Earl Bruce was down there. He had tears in his eyes, watching Devin Smith and Zach Smith, sharing a hug. And it's just, there's a ton of emotion there. So that one's always going to stand out just for the unbelievability factor and the domination. I mean, it might be the best performance we've ever seen from them.
Yeah, I could have taken about 25 guesses, Tony. I don't think I would have come up with that game for as big as it was. And it's easy to now think, oh, yeah, that was a great team. They moved on most of the team to the NFL in the first round. It seemed as though that was the case. It's easy to say that now, but they were a 4-point underdog with the third-string quarterback going into that game. Most people, I would think, would mention the Miami game or would mention the championship run from 2 years ago, whether it be the Alabama game or the Oregon game. But 59-0 against Wisconsin. And if they win that game by a touchdown, they probably don't get the nod over TCU or Baylor, just considering the reputation of the Big Ten at that point, and the bad loss early to Virginia Tech, a 7-6 team hanging on their record at that point. Tony Gerdeman joining us from the ozone.net. Please join him there from some quality coverage of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Tony's right there covering practice each and every day during the spring and coming up this August. Tony, it's been a while since the boys left the field from spring practice, but from a guy that's there on the sideline watching practice each and every day, I just got to hit you up with this one. What is your biggest takeaway from practice during those spring sessions that may be a little bit off the radar, whether it be a concern or whether it be something that may jump out as a positive unexpectedly?
I think for me, just the overall depth of the defense, because they lost some guys, but they've got just the recruiting that Urban Meyer's done over the last few years is starting to really just it builds the depth. And one of those guys in the depth was middle linebacker Justin Hilliard. He had a great spring. I wrote about him today. He's behind Chris Worley, who moved over from outside linebacker to be the middle linebacker. Justin Hilliard's a guy who's been injured for 2 years, so they didn't really know what they could do. I mean, he was a 5-star kid out of Cincinnati, but they haven't had him healthy, so they didn't know what he could do. And he showed them this spring that, if he does need to come in, he can do that. He surprised everybody because they finally got to see what he could do. So that's a guy, under the radar to watch. And the thing is, they're so deep right now, they may not need him, but he's there. He'll be on special teams, and that's a lot of the special teams guys is what, you'll see them this year. They'll be on the defense next year because they're going to lose another big batch of guys to the NFL this year. So he's one to watch. Then the cornerbacks, the freshman cornerbacks that they brought in, from the 2017 class, we can get into that later, but those guys were all impressive. So you might not see them much this year, but they're, you're going to be hearing their names, NFL draft in 3 or 4 years too.
It's Buckeyes Breakdown here at Mark Rogers TV each and every Wednesday night as we talk Ohio State football. We're pleased to be joined by Tony Gerdeman from the ozone.net. Join him there for the best in Ohio State football coverage. Before we break into the 2018 class that's sizing up at this point as maybe another legendary class, who knows at this point, you mentioned Urban Meyer's efforts recruiting. You just kind of alluded to it in the intro there. Jim Tressel brought in top 5 classes, not each and every year, but most years. And they may have slipped a couple notches near the lower portion of the top 10, but extremely strong classes. Why does it seem as though Urban Meyer has ratcheted that up, just not exponentially, but significantly?
Yeah, what he's done is, he'll always bring in, 20 plus guys. And Jim Tressel didn't always do that. He had a couple classes where they're in, the 16 or 18 or 14. So, those classes aren't going to be as highly ranked. They might have some guys at, at the top that are really good and at the bottom who end up being really good. But Urban Meyer, his classes, there's always 20, 25 guys in there. So there's more, more players to find and more players that can step up. So, but they also, they spend more money on it. They bring in more guys on official visits. Jim Tressel was famous for, only bringing in maybe 28 guys to sign, 20 of them, So Ohio State spends money like, it's going out of style, as they say. So whatever they need for the recruiting, they get, and that's, a bunch of official visits every single year. And so, you cast a wide net, you're going to catch a lot of fish. And the good thing about Ohio State is, they can throw the small ones back and keep the big ones.
And Tony, I think one of the storylines you're kind of alluding to is the balancing act that Urban Meyer finds himself in terms of keeping Ohio high school football healthy and those relationships strong versus going after just the best players, period. Regardless of where they come from, it's Ohio State, it's Urban Meyer. They should be able to go out and challenge for the best. And that's his philosophy because he is there to win national championships. Earlier in the recruiting season, it looked as though the output for 2018 might be a little bit lopsided. Now here in the last several weeks, some of the top players in Ohio have made their commitments to be Buckeyes. So can you kind of run down where we stand here in 2018?
Yeah, well, a lot of the top Ohio guys are still waiting, so, that's why Ohio State doesn't have too many Ohio kids committed right now, but you're still waiting on 5-star offensive tackle Jackson Carman, 4-star defensive end Tyreek Smith. So those are a couple of guys that are out there, 4-star receiver, LaChristian Smith, who he'll be a Buckeye next month, but, these are guys who haven't committed yet. So the Ohio numbers don't look so good, but you're right. I mean, that was a Jim Tressel staple, was getting the Ohio guys and bringing them in. And, maybe that's why his classes weren't as highly rated. And, I wrote, I think earlier in the month, Ohio State should recruit more Ohio kids, but which national kids are you going to give back? Are you not going to sign Nick Bosa or Joey Bosa so that you can get a 4-star, from Cleveland? Or, keep a Columbus kid home, and you say goodbye to Jeffrey Okudah, the 5-star cornerback from Texas. So yeah, they want to assign more Ohio kids. But right now, I was talking to somebody at Ohio State's camp last, a week or two ago, and there just aren't that many kids in Cleveland anymore. Columbus is, a better high school product than Cleveland right now. And who would have ever thought that would be, just 10 years ago? Cleveland was one of the best places in the country, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And now it's not even one of the top 3 places in the state. So when you consider that, you've got a lot of, hotbeds that aren't, quite as hot as they used to be. So, you can't just look at the borders and stay there. And Urban Meyer would love to. They talked about it on signing day. They want more Ohio kids, but it's up to the Ohio kids. In my opinion, it's not up to Ohio State.
Yeah, and it's a difficult thing because of the population shift that's moving west, that's moving south, and that's made it difficult on places like Ohio, which is still, I would say, in the top 6 to 8 in regards to quality and quantity of high school talent. If you look around the Big Ten and you size up the rosters, outside of that particular state's in-state recruits and signings, usually Ohio's in second place in the Big Ten in supplying college football players, and certainly in the MAC as well. All right, looking at the 2017 class, the ones that we're going to see on the field here in August, and to a large extent that we saw a handful of during spring practice. Talk about those guys, and I think you mentioned a few that we could see on the field immediately as impact players, guys that are going to be counted on just because of the need, or most likely because of their sheer ability. They're going to force themselves on the field this fall, versus maybe a few guys that are going to be more of the project status type.
The first guy that comes to mind as who will play will be the junior college transfer, Kendall Sheffield, the cornerback. He's a redshirt sophomore, and he's already in the top 3 at cornerback. He moved in, to that depth chart with Denzel Ward and Damon Arnett pretty quickly, and they expected that because he's an experienced guy. He was a freshman at Alabama in 2015. He was a starter on his junior college team last year. So he comes in and, he's one of the fastest guys on the team. He's an aggressive hitter, so he fits in with what they want to do. But if he wasn't there, then you're talking about maybe Sean Wade or Jeffrey Okudah at cornerback right behind him, or Marcus Williamson, another cornerback. So they brought in 4 guys early in the spring. 3 of them are freshmen. And if I had to pick one of those guys, it's going to be Sean Wade, out of Florida. He's tall, he's long, and all of these guys, they're pretty they're mature, because you talk to them and they tell you why they chose Ohio State, and it's not the NFL, it's the Real Life Wednesdays program that Urban Meyer implemented about life after football. So they know, especially at cornerback, they know Ohio State can get you to the NFL, but what they're being sold on and what their parents are being sold on, more than the NFL almost, is this real life, life after football. So those are 3 guys that should make an impact. And another guy I like is the running back J.K. Dobbins. He moved past Antonio Williams in the spring on a depth chart, and he could be the number 2 guy. And if you see Demario McCall move from running back to H-back, I think J.K. Dobbins is almost the main reason why. He's a 5'10", 210-pound guy, 4'4" guy. He's really shifty, really fast. He's maybe a smaller Ezekiel Elliott. Not that they're similar styles, but they do exactly what they're supposed to do. They fit this offense perfectly. They can line up out wide. They can catch the ball out of the slot. They're just really they're made for this offense. So I think they want to get him the ball this season and see what he can do with it. As far as, guys who are going to have to wait, I think the first guy is Tate Martell, the quarterback. There's no room for a freshman quarterback right now. There's no room for a redshirt freshman quarterback almost. So, he'll have to wait his turn. Although, he came in the spring and he fully expected to play. That's how he works. I saw him tweet a week or so ago that, he could be in the NFL in 3 years. And, while that's technically true, it's going to be hard for him to start, in the next 3 years. But hey, as Cardale Jones shows, you don't have to start too much to get to the NFL, right?
Yeah, I think 10 games should do it, especially when you don't lose any of them. That's a pretty good resume. All right, Tony Gerdeman joining us from the ozone.net as we talk Ohio State football each and every Wednesday night. We call it Buckeyes Breakdown. And Ohio State fans, if you just want to lock in on the Buckeyes, go to my dedicated YouTube channel for Ohio State football, Mark Rogers TV, Ohio State. You don't have to weed through all the Baylors and UCLAs to get to Ohio State football. You just check out all the long form versions of our conversations right there, talking about the Buckeyes each and every week. All right, Tony, by extension, we talk a little Big Ten here and there, and we've got quite a group of running backs coming back that are pretty decorated at this point in their careers. So I'd be interested to hear your top 5 running backs in the Big Ten heading into 2017.
Yeah, my list is a number 1 and 4 number 5s, I think, because I think Saquon Barkley from Penn State should be everybody's number 1. He's already talked about as a guy who could be like Ezekiel Elliott in the draft next year, a top 5, top 6, 7 guy in there. And, we saw him last year. He's elusive. He's probably the most dynamic guy in the Big Ten, regardless of position. So he's my number 1 by far. Number 2, it really just depends. I'd probably go with Justin Jackson of Northwestern. I expect him to have a big year. They've got a good offense. Yeah, he's an experienced guy. He's gotten better each year. He's making more big plays, which was something that he was sort of missing, his sophomore year. So I think he's number 2. And then number 3, I think based on what he has around him, I'll go with Mike Weber at Ohio State. He averaged 6 yards a carry last year and didn't hit many home runs. And they expect those home runs to come, this season. So that average could be 6.5, 7 yards a carry, which wouldn't be out of the ordinary for a Kevin Wilson offense. And that's what he's in right now. So you look at what Tevin Campbell or, his running backs in the past have been able to do. So there's potential there for Mike Weber. Number 4, I went with Akram Wadley of Iowa. I really like him. He's an elusive guy. Watched him really closely against Michigan last year, and he's the reason they beat the Wolverines. Rushed for over 100 yards. He's a fast guy. He's hard to bring down. He's not a big guy, but I wonder if he might have a backslide this year with new quarterback and some question marks on the offensive line and what that offense is going to look like. So he might not have as much freedom next year or this year, but he's going to be relied upon. And then number 5 would be L.J. Scott. And what I like about L.J. Scott and Wadley as well, as opposed to Weber, is they finished the season strong. Weber kind of didn't. So I could go with L.J. Scott at number 3 even, or number 4. But he's my number 5 right now. I want to see some, home runs out of him. We saw it against Ohio State. He was one of the best players on the field. He finished the season strong, but I just want to see some more consistency out of him. But, with Michigan State, they do a lot of running back by committee. So it's hard for one guy to get to 25, 20 carries a game, which seems strange considering, what Mark D'Antonio used to do with his running backs, like Le'Veon Bell and just, run them into the ground. So maybe he's learned from that.
Yeah, L.J. Scott, part of that flip-flop of sorts with Mike Weber as the Ohio kid goes to Michigan to play for Sparty. And, of course, Mike Weber comes down from Detroit to play for the Buckeyes. L.J. Scott, pretty durable back, I think, that suffered last year from Jack Conklin and some other offensive linemen that built a really strong nucleus up front for the Spartans in 2015, moving on to the NFL. And we know what happened to their passing attack as well as their entire team in the Big Ten and winning one game last year. Rodney Smith with Mitch Leidner, not a dynamic quarterback, ran for over 1,100 yards and 16 touchdowns for Minnesota as he splits the carries with Shannon Brooks. Saquon Barkley, if you just watch the games and you're just trying to select the guy that stands out, you're right. He's the one. The other guys are 4 and 5 type running backs if you're going to make a list of 5 because he's that far out and away the best back. And he's done it with a Penn State offensive line that's been pretty porous during his stay. And, of course, Saquon Barkley burst onto the scene with a $194 in Columbus at the shoe against the Buckeyes when Ohio State dominated the game and ran away, but they couldn't run down Saquon Barkley a whole lot in that game. But, he was thrilling against USC in the Rose Bowl, running for about 200 yards in that game. Justin Jackson. If you're going to go sheer statistics, maybe you go Justin Jackson. It's amazing if you would talk to college football fans Tony, as I'm sure you do on a regular basis. Justin Jackson isn't a guy that you rank with the some of the backs in the SEC like Darius Geis and Bo Scarborough and some of the guys that we just mentioned, but he is set to become one of the top 3 or 4 rushers in the history of the Big Ten. If he has a huge season, he's going to be a top 10 national rusher in the history of college football after gaining 1,500 yards for Northwestern. But like you say, not a guy that really kicks it into gear and can run away from people. Did a little bit more of that last year and had a huge pinstripe bowl against Pitt with 224 yards and 3 touchdowns. So Akram Wadley's kind of the guy that at least in terms of national attention, kind of flies under the radar. But Shift, quick guy that really can run away from people, catches the ball out of the backfield. And despite Iowa getting just completely crushed in the fourth quarter by Florida, it was a close game before that. In the fourth quarter against the Gators, they couldn't bring him down. He ran for 115 yards against front seven that's mostly moving on to the NFL. So he is an extremely, extremely good running back. And Corey Clement moving on from Wisconsin, and the Badgers usually have a guy or two in that top 5. It would be most likely a Bradrick Shaw taking over the top spot for the Badgers. All right, Tony Gerdeman from the ozone.net joining us talking Ohio State and Big Ten football here on a Wednesday night on Buckeyes Breakdown. Tony, we appreciate you filling in, and you are welcome anytime, sir.
I appreciate it. Anytime. Thanks for having me.